They always come back, but most people are so distracted by the moment of return that they never stop to ask why. They think it's about love, regret, or fate, but that's a comforting lie. The real reason someone returns after no contact is far more psychological than sentimental. It's rooted in power, absence, and the quiet collapse of the illusion they built around your presence. When you go silent, truly silent, it forces them to confront a version of themselves that only existed in your light. And without that reflection, they begin to unravel. No contact isn't about punishing someone, it's about forcing clarity. It interrupts the emotional supply they took for granted, and that disruption leaves them in a void they didn't expect to feel. They thought detachment would protect them until it didn't. They thought they could move on while you still chased until you didn't. And now they return, not out of strength, but because the silence exposed a weakness they were too proud to admit. This video isn't about the ego boost of being wanted again. It's about understanding the psychology behind why they come back, so you're never confused, never caught off guard, and never fooled by the mask of their return. Because once you truly understand the inner collapse that happens in your absence, you stop seeing their reappearance as romantic and start seeing it as inevitable. When you initiate no contact, the first thing that breaks isn't their heart, it's their sense of control. In toxic or avoidant dynamics, the one who feels most in control of the emotional tension usually feels the safest. They rely on your need for closure, validation, or connection to anchor their power. But when you go silent and stay silent, something primal shifts. Suddenly, the emotional blueprint they built, where you react, reach out, or explain yourself, starts to disintegrate. They no longer get the confirmation that you're still orbiting their world, and that uncertainty breeds discomfort. Control is a silent addiction in these dynamics. It gives them the illusion that they're emotionally untouchable, that they can discard, delay, or disrespect without consequence. But true no contact isn't passive. It's a psychological mirror that reflects their own detachment back at them. And that mirror isn't flattering. They begin to realize that the emotional leverage they once had is slipping, that their silence no longer commands pain, that their absence is no longer feared. That's when the collapse begins, not because they miss you in some Hollywood sense of the word, but because the role they played in your life is now void. They're no longer the center. They're no longer being pursued. And for someone who feeds on attention or dominance, that is a direct threat to their identity. You didn't just walk away, you removed the stage they were performing on. And once that stage is gone, all they're left with is themselves, and the silence is far louder than they expected. What most people don't understand is that emotional presence doesn't vanish just because physical contact ends. If anything, no contact amplifies it. Every moment you shared, every emotional high and low, every unfinished sentence, all of it becomes louder in the silence. That's because the human brain doesn't process emotional loss like a clean break. It echoes, especially when there's no closure. Your absence becomes a kind of ghost, not haunting them in the supernatural sense, but through the nervous system's tendency to replay unresolved emotional loops. You left an imprint, not because you begged or chased, but because at some point they felt something real around you, even if they denied it later. And now, with no new data, no new emotional interactions, their mind replays the old ones with greater intensity. They try to distract themselves, chase new validation, keep moving, but your emotional fingerprint lingers because it was never fully confronted or processed. You didn't just disappear, you withdrew a certain kind of energy that they had unconsciously come to depend on, even if they never admitted it out loud. And now the nervous system reaches for that pattern only to be met with emptiness. That's where the echo begins. Every environment they step into without you reminds them, consciously or not, of how they used to feel with you, how they used to be seen, and how they used to have power. Emotional imprint is real, and the more they try to suppress it, the more it resurfaces in dreams, in memories, in the quiet moments when no one's watching. No contact doesn't make them forget you. It forces them to feel you in a way they can't escape. As the silence stretches on, they don't just remember you, they begin to rewrite you. This is where the inner war begins. Guilt on one side, fantasy on the other. The guilt is subtle at first, a flash of discomfort when they scroll past an old message, a hollow feeling when your name surfaces in conversation. But over time, it grows. Not because they suddenly became accountable, but because the silence strips away the distractions that kept them from confronting their behavior. And without your presence to absorb the blame, they begin to sit in the emotional residue of their own actions. The fantasy, however, is more seductive. They start to idealize you, not the real, complex version of you, but the simplified image that fits their current emotional needs. They remember the affection without the conflict, the warmth without the boundaries, the moments of being desired without the cost of responsibility. And so they drift between guilt and longing, between self-reproach and self-soothing. They rewrite history in a way that paints themselves as more innocent, you as more forgiving, and the bond as more perfect than it ever truly was. This inner war intensifies when no contact remains unbroken, because now they can't test those fantasies against reality. They can't provoke a reaction to relieve the guilt, and they can't reach out casually without admitting they care. So they stay stuck, looping through memories, rewriting stories, imagining reconciliation, but unable to find peace. That emotional dissonance becomes unbearable. And when the pain of guilt collides with the seduction of fantasy, the impulse to return becomes overwhelming. Not always to apologize, not always to make things right, but simply to escape the discomfort of not knowing how you see them anymore. Their return is often less about who you are now, and more about what they need to believe about themselves. There's a point in no contact where their mind may pretend they're fine, but their body betrays them, and that's where the truth lives. The nervous system doesn't operate on pride, logic, or carefully crafted stories. It responds to emotional patterns, safety cues, and perceived threats. And when your presence was once a source of emotional stimulation, whether through conflict, attention, affection, or control, your absence becomes a disruption. For someone who's used to managing relationships through avoidance or dominance, the silence feels like a loss of tethering. They may go days, even weeks, pretending they don't care, but their bodies start sending signals they can't ignore. Nervousness spikes, dreams they can't shake, emotional flashes triggered by places, songs, or silence. These aren't just sentimental memories, they're dysregulations. The nervous system is trying to reestablish a known pattern, and when it can't locate your emotional energy, it panics. This is especially true when you were the one to break the pattern, when your silence wasn't a collapse, but a choice. It creates an unfamiliar dynamic where they're no longer reacting to your chaos or comfort, but instead forced to sit in their own. And for people who avoid vulnerability by staying in control, that's intolerable. No contact removes the emotional feedback loop they depend on, and over time, that lack of stimulation forces their body to feel what their ego keeps avoiding: discomfort, regret, confusion, loss. Even if they try to regulate by seeking attention elsewhere, it doesn't feel the same, because emotional bonds aren't duplicated on demand, they're imprinted. And the nervous system knows when the imprint it's craving isn't there. That's why they come back, not because they've suddenly become whole, but because their body is screaming louder than their pride, and they no longer can pretend they don't feel the absence you created. What truly haunts them after no contact isn't just your absence, it's the sudden realization that the power dynamic has shifted, and they didn't authorize it. When someone has grown accustomed to you reaching out, explaining yourself, or staying emotionally available no matter how poorly they handled you, they begin to mistake that access for entitlement. They assume that no matter what they do, you'll still feel something, still wait, still hold space. But when you break that cycle, calmly, without drama, without warning, their identity within the relationship begins to erode. They're no longer the one being chased, desired, or forgiven. They are now the one being ignored. And that threatens the very foundation of their ego. This reversal triggers a kind of psychological panic, not because they suddenly see your value, but because they suddenly feel the loss of their own. They can no longer rely on your reactions to prop up their sense of importance. They can no longer predict your emotional moves, which means they can no longer manipulate the rhythm of the connection. And for someone who maintained control through emotional push-pull, that loss of rhythm is existential. It forces them to ask, did I lose them? Did they stop caring? Was I never as powerful as I believed? These questions don't just sting, they spiral. And the more indifferent you remain, the more they realize they're no longer the emotional center of your universe. That's the true pain, not losing the relationship, but losing the power they had within it. Your silence becomes their mirror. It reflects back not just who they were to you, but who they are without you. And for people who measure their worth by how much power they have over others, nothing is more haunting than the quiet dignity of someone who no longer needs them.
Beyond the internal collapse, there comes a moment when the outside world stops reflecting back the image they want to see, and that's when the social mirror shatters. During no contact, they may initially distract themselves with attention from others, trying to patch over the loss with superficial validation. But validation without depth is like drinking salt water. It intensifies the thirst. At first, they may posture, acting unbothered, keeping up appearances, spinning the narrative that they walked away. But time reveals what image control can sustain: the slow erosion of emotional significance. People around them stop asking about you. The drama fades. The power they once flaunted starts to feel hollow, especially when the person who gave them meaning has gone silent. And unlike the emotional mirror, which reflects how they feel about themselves, the social mirror reflects how others now see them, and what they see is someone who lost something real. If they treated you poorly, that begins to surface in conversations, in subtle judgment, in quiet changes in how others engage with them. The glow they once held by being connected to you dims, and the absence becomes conspicuous. Worse still, if you've elevated, moved forward, healed, thrived in silence, it creates contrast. You become a mirror to their stagnation, and your evolution threatens the image they've tried to maintain. In toxic dynamics, perception is currency, and when no contact strips them of the illusion that they're still wanted, still chased, still central, it's not just their ego that suffers, it's their reputation within the emotional ecosystem they tried to dominate. The mask slips, the story unravels, and the social mirror, once flattering, now shows the one thing they can't tolerate: irrelevance. When they come back after no contact, your response is the crossroads where everything changes. This moment holds the power to either reinforce your sovereignty or to drag you back into the old cycle of emotional chaos and power struggles. Most people panic and chase, desperate to reclaim what slipped through their fingers. But chasing is surrender. It signals that their absence fractured your stability, not theirs. To respond with mastery means to approach with calm, unwavering boundaries rooted in the stoic truth that your value is independent of their attention. You do not owe explanations, justifications, or immediate forgiveness. Instead, observe their behavior. Listen carefully to what they say and what they don't say. Are they taking responsibility or slipping into old patterns of blame and avoidance? Are they returning to grow or to regain control? Respond with measured clarity. Engage only if their return aligns with your standards of respect and emotional maturity. If they test your limits, remain detached, knowing your peace is non-negotiable. Remember, no contact is not a weapon, but a tool for self-mastery. Their return is not a victory, but an opportunity to redefine the terms of engagement on your own powerful, sovereign terms. This is how you break the cycle. This is how you transform absence into strength. And when you hold that ground, you are no longer just someone they return to. You become someone they must respect or lose forever. The real victory lies not in their return, but in your mastery over how you respond. The moment someone returns after no contact is a pivotal test, not of their sincerity, but of your strength and clarity. You've seen the raw psychological truth behind why they come back. The collapse of control, emotional imprint, nervous system chaos, and fractured identity, all pushing them toward you again. But understanding these forces isn't enough unless you use that knowledge to reclaim your power. This is your call to rise above old patterns, to refuse the pull of fantasy and guilt, and to stand firmly in the reality of your worth. You decide if their return rewrites the story or if it's just another chapter in a cycle you refuse to repeat. True power lies in emotional sovereignty. Knowing your value is not tied to their presence or absence, and holding your boundaries without apology. If you meet their return with stoic clarity and strategic awareness, you control the narrative, not them. This is the way of the modern warrior philosopher, unshaken, decisive, and unafraid to walk away if respect and growth aren't on the table. If this video gave you insight and strength, drop a comment below sharing your story or questions, because your experience sharpens this community's wisdom. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more deep psychological breakdowns designed to elevate your emotional mastery and power. Remember, silence isn't weakness, it's your shield. Stand strong, stay clear, and always lead with control.